Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Stacy Fox. I'm with the Market Intelligence team at Open Minds. Today, as part of our weekly Circle Elite Roundtable series, Open Minds Senior Associate Brittany Snyder, Vice President Richard Lewis, and Marketing Director Ashley Sterner will present best practices marketing for getting more consumers and contracts. Our panel brings decades of combined marketing strategy and business development expertise in the health and human services field to Open Minds. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping reminders. While your audio will be muted during today's briefing, we want to hear any questions you may have. Please feel free to submit those in the question box on the right side of your screen, and we'll present them to the panel. Also, the slides and recording from today's briefing will be available on the Open Minds website tomorrow. So with that, let's get started. Brittany, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Stacy. So to get started, we're going to be looking at the keys to a successful digital marketing in this new era of COVID and how that has changed a lot of what we typically think about when we think about marketing. And then we'll move into the how do you put all of this into practice? How do you evaluate your website and make sure that it's optimized to get you the best traction so that you can increase your customers and your number of contracts. And so starting out, let's just start with the standard, what is marketing? Marketing is the part of your business that is focused on lead generation and the organizational revenue. So this is going to include any of those activities that you guys are conducting that are generating revenue. This is understanding the needs of your customers and developing the services that match those needs at a price that is comfortable to both of you. And the simple act of promoting, selling, and distributing the products and services that your organization provides. So really, marketing is all about getting the revenue you need to fulfill that mission that you're always driving towards and trying to hit. And the more competitive the market is, the more important all of these marketing competencies are going to be to your organization. So you really need to, especially in today's market, make sure that you have a team dedicated to marketing that knows the ins and outs of your website, your social media, and all of your digital marketing strategies and plans. That way you can compete with all of the other organizations in today's market. So when we look at understanding the role of your website, we're going to start with your strategic plan first. So I'm going to assume that all of you have a strategic plan. Whether that's true or not, we're not sure, but I'm going to assume you do, and that the objectives that you have, at least one of them is going to be generating revenue and generating interest for acquisitions, mergers, investments, partnerships, any of those. And then typically another big one is sustaining revenue that you already have. So those are some big objectives that we see in a lot of strategic plans, and those are actually going to be what drive your marketing strategy. So your marketing strategy, after you're done with your strategic plan, if you don't have a marketing strategy already, you absolutely need to develop one. And it needs to be developed in a way that it's designed to completely achieve all of those objectives that you've set forth in your strategic plan. And if you haven't done your strategic plan yet, you always want to develop that strategic plan so that it's driving towards the mission that your organization has. So make sure you have a solid organizational mission set in stone that you understand, and develop your strategy to achieve whatever that mission is. And then from there, you will be developing your marketing strategy to achieve all of those objectives. And when it comes to your marketing strategy, The most important tool you're going to have, especially in today's age, is your website. So when you're looking at things, you want to make sure your website is a solid foundation within your marketing strategy. And when you develop your website, you also want to have a website strategy. So that's getting developed from that marketing strategy that you have. And really, this website, its main goal is to get out communications and messaging about your organization. It's a place for people to find you and understand who you are, what services you offer, how you compare to all the other organizations similar to you in the geographical location that you're in.
And I think if I can add something, Brittany, I think
Of course.
things that we've seen is, and as we're talking about the new normal, especially coming out of COVID, so many things have changed in the market. You know, new competitors, some competitors went out of business. The huge explosion in use of telehealth and virtual consultation,
Yes.
what payers are looking for now in these, you know, again, coming out of the pandemic to provide access to the provider networks and these things. So, I mean, everybody really should be re-looking at all of the things that you're talking about now, because it's critical, because our markets are not the same they were today as they were a year and a half ago.
Yes, the markets have definitely changed quite a bit. And, you know, that's why this website's so crucial now, especially since we went through that time frame of everything being virtual. So if you don't have virtual services, that already is putting you at a disadvantage. And if you don't have a website, no one is going to find you. No one's going to know what services you have, and they're not going to know anything about you. So if they see a bad review on Google or somewhere, or their friend tells them something bad about your organization, there's nothing to go against that and show all the positives and the good quality you have. So it's really, really important to have a good website. And even if you think your website's great, you should always be continually evaluating it to make sure that it's the best website that you can possibly have. And speaking of those shifts, when we talk about the 0 moment of truth shift, this is how, before, whenever it came to sales, the first moment of truth was typically happening when an individual was standing in the store trying to decide what kind of diapers to buy their kid, or, you know, what type of pasta do we want to buy? And they're looking at everything in the aisle and making their decision right there. But now with this new 0 moment of truth, the way that it's working is that everyone's going online to research things first. So maybe I want to make some kind of pasta, and I'm going to go online and see what kind of noodles are best for that. And maybe I want wheat noodles instead of some other kinds of noodles, or I want diapers that do certain things other ones are not capable of. You can always go online and do your research and kind of figure out what it is you want and which brand closely meets what you're looking for. And similar to that, we're seeing that almost 90% of Americans say that they research their healthcare providers and treatment options online before making their decision. And half of those people will openly admit that they have made their healthcare decision based on whatever they've read or seen online. So if you don't have a website, or if you haven't been managing the reviews and things people are posting about your organization online, you're already at a disadvantage, because all of those people either aren't able to find you and you essentially don't exist to them, or if you have anything negative out there, that is what everyone thinks of your organization. And basically, a lot of people are going to assume that if there isn't anything out there, that it's because it's all negative. So it's always better to have that website in place where you can put out positive feedback about your organization and the services you offer. And then another part of this all came from a Think with Google annual study that they did. And it found that 82% of Americans feel that essentially all healthcare providers do the same thing. They have the same services. They all have the same quality. So when they think about their healthcare services, they think you and Joe Schmo down the street have the exact same product, services. You have the same quality of services, even if your services may far exceed what so-and-so down the street has. They are just going to assume that you guys are the same. So that's another reason why it's important to make sure that information gets on your website and is out there for the public to find. And when it comes to that, most Americans say that they're going to put forth a lot of effort to make sure that they find a healthcare provider that is perceived to be better than all of the other ones in their area. So that's why they're conducting that research, because they're trying to find the best of the best. And that needs to be shown on your website why you are the best of the best, so that they're going to choose you over your competitors in the market.
Just
And
to add,
then,
Brittany,
yeah,
if I can jump in
of
quickly,
course.
in addition to the website being vital, there are some steps too that even take place, like we were mentioning, before they even get to your website. So you have to be there, you have to be accessible, but then you also have to have those ratings that Brittany's talking about. So sometimes before you're still in the search before you even get to that website. And if they see a rating and you're below someone else, and so you might be the first result, but you have a lower score, that can be problematic, especially when you look at the numbers of this group that they clearly are focused on this as a consumer should be as they research. So there are even some steps before they even get to your front door, which is your website too. So building that in to your website, it comes full circle. That way you do show up and you are present and you do have those ratings, but they do work hand in hand. And it's important to think of that as well.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And I mean, I will be the first to say that when I do Google searches for companies, I do look at those ratings. And if you have 2 stars and somebody down the street has 4 and all good things to say about them, I'm going to go to the one that has a higher rating, just because naturally we all want the best of the best.
Definitely.
And so related to that, the 4 top places that the individuals who were surveyed said that they go to find all of their healthcare information and look for any answers that they may have about their healthcare provider choice. They're looking at your website, number 1, and your social media, if you have any of it. They're looking at ratings and reviews like we were talking about on Google and Health Grades and all of those other sites. And they're simply looking at Google. So you really need to make sure that your website is top of the line. It's showcasing your organization in the best possible light you can, and making sure that you have a communication strategy set up to respond to any of those negative reviews you may be receiving. That way, they're not just lingering around there, and you're able to actually identify what issues there might be and respond to those accordingly, which is going to make you look better in the end of the day. So
one comment on that too. The one thing to keep in mind, there's there's most of the health plans out there, you know, the big national plans, if you have contracts with them, you know, they don't always make direct referrals. Most of the time they direct their members to their provider directories, which you may be on, which provides a link to your website. And that's the first thing the client is going to see is that website, and it needs to be set up so that I, as the client, can immediately understand who you are, what you do, how to make a referral, how can I schedule an appointment, you know, very, very consumer centric, easy to use. Health plans are relying more and more on that website as that single for members accessing care. So just something to think about for those of you health plan or managed care contracts.
Yes. And, you know, dealing with that consumer, really, we're in an era right now where it's all about consumer choice. They have so many different options and have so much information available to them at easy access that you really need to make sure you have all of your key information on your website or online so that they can find it. And we do have 5 things that we really say absolutely need to be on your website because this is what your audience is looking for. Those are things like, what are your costs? Because everyone wants to know dollars associated with services. And what is the quality of the care that you're providing? Why is that higher than other folks around you? What sets you apart from other providers in your area? And then the reviews, you know, what are your patients and caregivers saying about you? What do they think about you? That's important to a lot of people because they're not going to go somewhere where there is a perception that maybe your receptionist has a bad attitude. They're not going to want to go there then. They're going to opt for a place that has nicer things to say about the staff. And then you really need to have information on your reputation for safety and why your facility is a safe space, what measures you guys have in place to ensure that all of the folks coming into your facility are safe and cared for. And then the performance of your clinical staff. You want to make sure that you're putting out there how great your clinical staff are, where they're educated. Basically make sure that it doesn't say that you have lots of malpractice suits out against some of your clinical staff, because if somebody finds that, they're not going to want to see anybody in your facility. So you really need to make sure you have answers to these questions on your website, and they need to be very easy to find, but don't lie about them. So be as very accurate in your response to this, but be direct and make sure that it's putting the best light on you that you can, because this is really the one platform that you have total control over. You manage it, you control how the messaging comes out, you really get to talk to your target audience through this channel. And so that's why this website is so important to your marketing strategy. So how do we even start with our website and our objectives? So your website should be designed based on your target audience. To identify your target audience, you are going to take all of the objectives you have as part of your marketing strategy, your strategic plan, and you need to associate all of the various audiences that you have with whichever objectives they tie to. So not all of your audience is going to be relative to every objective. There's different audiences for each of those different objectives. Like whenever somebody you're looking for partnerships, that's going to be a different audience than, say, the consumer that we're trying to provide services for. So you really need to go through and make sure you've identified all of those audiences first, and then go through and prioritize those audiences. Look at how much of your revenue comes from each of them and really weight them so that you're making sure the majority of your marketing collateral that you're developing for your website, for your social, for any of the print materials you have, they're going towards those audiences that have the majority of your revenue in their hands. And that's why it's super important for you to make sure that you know who your audience is and who you're focusing these marketing materials for. Because, you know, maybe the media and PR might be one of your audiences, but they could also only contribute to maybe 3% of your revenue. So you're not going to want to develop as many materials focused towards them. Whereas your consumers are going to be a large part of your revenue most likely, and that's who your website's typically addressing. You're speaking to that audience in your website and marketing collateral. And that's why, you know, we're saying figure it out, run the numbers, look at exactly where your revenue is coming from, which audiences that's tied to, and essentially create your marketing materials so that the same percentages match up where most of your collateral is going to wherever most of your revenue comes from.
And if I can just jump in a second, Brittany. So just to add to that, I think as my mind takes away, a big summary is prioritizing. So prioritizing those objectives and obviously pairing them up with your audience, but then also that ties into placement on your website. So your example about media and PR was really great. A lot of times you see a link in the footer for press and media. So that's a great example where you can visualize how that translated to the website and lives and breathes there, versus some of their other ones where at the top you're going to see buttons for donors and investors versus then you're seeing resources for patient and caregivers. So it's everything has its place. It's that sense of prioritizing and removing barriers so that those individuals can make that journey that you want to take them to take and guide them to your end result. And this is a really great first step to prioritize those objectives that really just drives right to the website.
Yes, thank you. And along with that, you know, content on your website is incredibly important. That's where a lot of the information that people find is going to come from. You know, content really is the king when it comes to this. You need to make sure that you have the right content and that the content you have is easy to find. So you need to be looking at which stakeholder has highest priority in that list of audience that we found. And the ones that do have the highest priority, that's the ones that we're going to be writing the website copy for and having most of our resources focused on speaking to that exact audience, because that's where most of our money is coming from. And you want to make sure that the information that you do have, that it's the information that that target audience is looking for. You know, those 5 questions we had about what is your cost compared to your competitors, where is that on your website? And make sure that it's somewhere where they can easily find it and that you have answers to those 5 questions that we put out there on there, since that's usually the information that your target audience is looking for. But maybe your target audience typically looks for different information. You know, maybe they're looking for the locations that you have, or if you offer a certain service, and you want to make sure that you have the answers to those questions that are most important to that audience in a place that's easy to find. And then you're going to obviously allocate time, money, and resources to the parts of your website that provide all of this information, because that's where your money's coming from. So obviously we're gonna wanna devote a lot of resources to those places. And these are just a few examples of content that you could be creating and putting on your website, and some of the objectives that you could have towards that. So when you're looking to drive revenue, these are things like the copy that's on each of your web pages, pictures, anything that can be downloaded, assessments, stuff like that. If you're looking to be a thought leader in a certain area, you can have things like white papers and podcasts posted. Or if you care about education and you want to educate your target audience, you could have directions and contact information so they know how to get in touch with you and where to find you. Or you could have different infographics so that they can see a visual representation of what you're trying to convey to them. And for your public relations audience, you know, those are things like press releases and about us and videos that might show what you guys do in the community. So these are just, you know, a couple of the types of content that you could be creating. There's a whole host of other ones, but, you know, this is kind of showing you that if you're looking at your objective, you want to make sure you're developing content that is achieving that objective.
And you know, when we're talking about content is king and really kind of content analysis, you know, to kind of make sure website is speaking to the right folks, and it's tricky because our websites are speaking to health plans and payers and members and resources and all the critical, which I think goes back, Brittany, to your prioritization of, you know, who does this, you know, the top 3 folks that we're trying to, you know, be accessible for. And I mean, this list is very comprehensive. And I think finding in your market with the services you provide, the payers you're contracted with, I think all come to play in terms of how you sculpt your content into something that's going to be meaningful for target audiences.
Yeah, and so basically that prioritization is also going to contribute to how much of this content you're developing for each of those audiences. And obviously you want to kind of pare it down to, like you were saying, the top 3 of them. You might have 20 different audiences, but you're not going to develop content extensively for all of them. You would focus on, say, the top 3, and that's where the majority of your time and resources is going to. So another reason why your priorities are important.
Definitely. And I think an activity too, not to get too in the weeds, but as we look at these groups and we identify our targets, is coming up with some audience profiles and really mapping out. So you're identifying your groups, but then also categorizing what that user is looking to find and making sure that they have a path to get to that resource. So as you plan your content, you need to have all those resources there, and then you need to have the path for them to get to that resource. And a lot of that is really taking an in-depth look in time at that user and identifying, back to the questions we addressed earlier, what that user is looking for. And those questions and answers are going to be different for each of these groups, and taking a personal take on each of these groups and making sure that content is tailored and there for them makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. And so to be able to actually do that, you would be conducting a website evaluation and plan for improvement. And this is where we're going to touch on your consumer experience, usability, accessibility, and how to tell if your website's actually working. So when it comes to a consumer experience, you need to focus on being consistent. So all of your calls to action should be in the same style and convention. You don't want to be all over the place with what you're trying to get people to do. embrace the white space that you have. Don't be afraid to have blank white areas on your website. You want to make sure that people can easily read all of the content on there and that what's on there is usable. So with getting rid of all of that visual clutter and just stuff that's not necessary, you're going to be able to better define the content relationship with that consumer and make it easier for them to identify the information that they're looking for without getting lost in images or charts or graphics or a rambling of content that is all saying one thing. And then reducing friction. So as Paul Andrews said, friction presents a major problem to users and designers alike because it reduces conversions, increases bounce rates, and causes users to abandon their tasks. So this means that we want to reduce the amount of things we're telling people to do, and we don't want to confuse them. We want to have an easy journey to where they are going. So like Ashley was talking about with this, knowing your customers, what questions they're going to have, what information they want, we need to look at said customer and look at their profile and the question that they have and kind of map out the journey that they're going to take to get that information. So your customer might have the question objective to find a healthcare provider that provides telehealth services. How are they going to go about doing that? They're going to do research on, say, Google or whatever search engine they find, and they're going to pop up to your website. How are they going to find what services you have? You want to make it easy for them to see a full list of your services, and that telehealth is one of those services that you have. So it's really just making sure there's less noise on your website and focusing on the critical aspects of things.
Definitely. Another word I like to use is barriers too. So barriers to action. So sometimes it's friction, but in other times, if you don't even have that end goal for them, it could be a barrier in the sense that they don't ever even get to what they need in the end, which is another problem we experience.
Yes.
And when I think about what you're both talking about, the consumer experience and reducing friction and barriers, immediately what comes to my mind is having a website that speaks to, again, what the health plans are looking for, and payers are timely access to care. They want to make sure when a client is going to your website, one of their members, they can easily access the services that they need, which is usually, an initial assessment or scheduling an initial appointment. But that just speaks to all the things that payers are looking for. And I see here, we talk a little about reduces conversions. I think of conversion rates. How many viewed your website, and of those 10, how many of them actually went the next step to access services? If only 2 of 10 did, there may be something that you want to revisit on your website that may be, to Ashley's point, to taking that next step. So, health plans monitor this stuff now, especially now that most of our industry is moving to, whether you're Medicaid or commercial health plan business, to health plan, health plans are managing these benefits. They're all looking at HEDIS measures, and one of the top is access to care. So we want to make sure we're reducing friction and all these fancy words. I can understand that.
Yes, barriers is definitely an easy to understand one. And I mean, that's really the whole goal here, is to reduce all of those things that are blocking your target audience from getting the information they need. So make it simple. Usability is a big thing with your website. So Nielsen Norman Group defines usability as an attribute that assesses how easy user interface is for a user. really what it comes down to is the learnability, efficiency, memorability, errors, and satisfaction of your website. So if your website is difficult to use, if they don't have the right information on your homepage, say a user gets lost somewhere on your website trying to find something because it's not easy for them to locate, or if there's just too much information and it's really hard to read, all of those people, they're gone. They left your website a long time ago. They had trouble and they left. You need to make sure that your website is simple and usable and that everyone can find the information they want easily, and that it's designed in a way that it doesn't have all of that clutter everywhere, so that people really can find what they're looking for and remember where it was that they found this. So while they're doing their research, maybe they look at your company, but then they go look at somebody else, and then they remember, oh, I saw that on so-and-so's website. I think that's where I want to go. So you really want to make sure that your design looks nice and it has all of the information that you need without being overly busy.
Definitely. And this is something that I think sometimes we underestimate the amount of time we have to secure these individuals, where we think that they might browse or navigate, but a lot of times you don't have a lot of time before that user is abandoning it. So it is a lot more critical than sometimes we expect.
Yes. A lot of times when you look at the rates that people leave websites or how long they're spending looking at things, you have seconds to a minute before somebody's like, oh, this is too hard, I'm done. So within the first 30 seconds, you need to make sure that you're grabbing their attention, having the basic information that they want, and that it looks appealing to them. Because if you have a messy website that somebody can't read, or they can't find what they're looking for, that it just doesn't look nice, then they're just going to leave. They're not going to stay on there and browse around because it's too hard for them to find what they want.
Exactly. And I know we will get into this too when we get to the measurability of it, but it plays into that. So these are all things that you can monitor. So you can analyze your pages or your site in general to target that. So if you see users abandoning after only seconds and really never getting any action and conversions, as we discussed. So luckily these things are actionable in ways we can right the ship, but it does take monitoring.
Yes, and that is something that everyone should be doing. If you have a website, you need to be monitoring it, looking at the analytics associated with it. We'll get into that with the measures and stuff, but that's absolutely true, Ashley. And then the next part of it, when it comes to your website, it needs to be accessible, because, if people can't find what they need, if it's too hard to read, they're gonna just leave. If somebody can't find the assistance that they want, they're gonna leave. If they can't hear the content that you have, or they can't read it properly, or you're having operational issues like broken links and stuff like that on the website, people are going to leave. They're, like we were talking about, those bounce rates are going to look high to you, and people are only going to spend a couple of seconds before they just call it a day and say they're done. They're not going to try to find the website content anymore because it's too hard. And so, you really need to present it so that all of the users can access the information they want. You need to make sure that your website is operable, that they can use the keyboard to navigate, and there have to be multiple input modalities. You really need to make sure you have alternative text set up for images so that users that are visually impaired can still understand what it is that they're being shown without being able to see it. and, making sure that the content is going to be able to be interpreted properly, that the functionality is predictable, and that you have cues in place to help avoid leading users to places on the website that they're not trying to find. So, if you have an article with links to other places, you don't want to randomly throw a link in for something that's completely unrelated to what that article is focusing on, because then, you're getting your user off track and they're not staying to where they want to be. So making sure that your website is understandable, that it's robust and operable, and that it's perceivable, the design looks nice, are really important, again, especially for those bounce rates.
I think it's really come a long way, and we're fortunate that there's so many tools out there today that make this so much easier. So as we're sitting here, it can seem a little daunting about how do we cover and check all these boxes. But I mean, there are web tools that you can access now where it can scan your website and provide you a score so you know how you're performing in these areas. We have tools out there where you can adjust your level of reading. So if you have certain users that fall into certain categories and you need to speak to them at a certain level so that they can take away what they need to, those things can be adjusted. So it's a lot of learning about the topics. That way you can plug in, use the right tools to get you where you need to be. And luckily there's a lot more of those tools out there today for us.
Yes, that's so true, especially with this accessibility stuff. You'll see so many more tools now to evaluate the accessibility of your website for users, who may be visually impaired, say. And I know that Google also, that plays into where you show up in their search rankings. If your website is not accessible, then you drop down in the rankings of the search. So you might end up in page 3 instead of page 1 because your website's not accessible for somebody that may have a visual impairment. So that's why it's really important to make sure that you do, run your website through one of these tools. A lot of them can be found online very easily. So just run them through there and make sure that you have the content and information that you need. Your web developer should know how to do all of this and make sure that you're in compliance with all of the guidelines that are set. And so really we're looking at, with these things, having a device agnostic design, just meaning that your website should be compatible with a smartphone, a tablet, the laptop, desktop monitor. You want to make sure that no matter what device they're looking at it on, that it still looks clean and readable. It's easy to use. You want to make sure that you have lots of visual cues and progress indicators on things. So like this little shopping cart, if you offer services that can be purchased outright, maybe having a shopping cart somewhere so people can click on that and see what they've added to their cart already is a great visual cue for folks that may have a little trouble, seeing those types of things. And you really want to make sure that color code things. Color coding things is great. It ensures that people can see the hierarchy of your website. It makes it more legible for people. And, it really just showcases your organization. So using color contrast to help people go where they need to go is really going to be something that helps with that accessibility piece.
I think another part to the visual cues I wanted to touch on, just something that comes up in conversations that I have often when we're looking at design and icons. Sometimes there's a hesitancy because they think that it's part of their branding and they don't necessarily associate icons with their branding, which that can be problematic because the more and more you have on your website, visual cues are essential. So that shopping cart icon, that download icon, that call to action that's always the same color for that user are critical. So it's a mixture of melding that with the branding, but not leaving those cues out because you don't feel it encompasses your branding, because they have to be mixed in to provide that visual. A lot of times when you're scanning a page, you're going to see that shopping icon or that download icon before you might register the text. So it's factoring that in, and so taking a step, maybe pushing your branding a little bit to include more of that, because it is vital and sometimes there's a little confusion there, but those cues are essential.
That is a very good point.
And just throw one other thing before we move off accessibility. You know, as we talk about best practice marketing in the context of contracts, getting new contracts and generating new business, we don't want to forget that a big part of that for payers nowadays, as I mentioned before, is that accessibility issue. You're positioning yourself for expanding your current payer contracts, whether it's public or private or commercial, or getting new contracts when they look and see that you have the tools in place that's going to make accessibility for members and referrals easier. So these things, when we're going to them with contracts and saying we want a contract, we want to expand, they want to look and see how we're doing with the tools you have in place for accessibility. And your website is the number one most important, as Brittany mentioned earlier today, and provider network accessibility is the number one issue and problem for most payers, health plans in just about every state. So we can't underscore or emphasize how important that website is for accessibility for all of these different reasons.
And so how do you measure the success of any of this? How do you make sure that your website is doing what it needs to do, that your marketing materials are doing what you are planning for them to do? How do you make sure that everything is achieving the objectives that you've set for this marketing plan for your website? To do this, you need to develop a set of key performance indicators. These should be measures that are going to be able to tell you, whether what you're doing is leading to that goal that you set for yourself. You need to collect all of the analytics associated with these measures to make sure that you are achieving those objectives you set forth. You're looking at the analytics like conversion numbers and the number of new subscribers, maybe looking at the bounce rates. You can be looking at the number of people that filled out a form that you have online. These are all kind of things that you can look at to determine if your website and marketing materials are doing what you set out to have them do. And along with that, looking at quantitative studies. So you can do A/B testing where you're sending out maybe 2 different emails with different subject lines to see which one speaks more to the audience that you're trying to reach, or showing heat maps or website analytics. I mean, all of these quantitative things are going to make it easy for you to see whether you actually are succeeding at achieving the objectives that you set forth for your organization. And along with that, it's also really important to conduct qualitative research too. So these are things like focus groups or just things that you observe while you're looking at the website. You might do some interviews with some of your stakeholders to see what they think of the website or what they would suggest changing maybe. And that'll really help you understand the perception of the information that you're putting out there and the materials you have. That way you know if you are still in line with the goals that you're trying to achieve. And we have a couple of examples. These are just some sample key performance indicators that you might use and which goals you're kind of going to for those. So say you have donors are one of your top audiences, you want to look at, what is your donor retention rate? And it aligns with the best practice of outcomes measures and demonstrated impact. You obviously want to increase that donor retention rate. So this is something that you're going to keep an eye on, and you're going to continue to look at what the actual numbers are to make sure that you're keeping the donors that you already have, while also looking at unique page views and how many new users you have, new donors you have. That way, you're still making sure that you're retaining those that you already have while generating new ones. And there are lots of things that you can look at to make sure that you are aligning with those best practices and the objectives that we set forth for the organization.
Yeah, a lot of times the KPIs and what we're measuring here, it might seem like there's a lot out there and a lot to look at and a lot to track, but really if you break it down, they tell stories. So if you even look at just one page, you can see the numbers and track that over time and see, are more people visiting that page or less people? How much time are they spending on that page? So it takes an amount of dissecting it and storytelling to add to the data that you've collected. So just running it and having all the data isn't always helpful, but applying it to then have that story to tell, to then make an action. So we can see this page gets bounces pretty quickly compared to another similar page. So we need to revisit this one and see what we can do to get those numbers up to make them, just to make actionable changes that help get to the goals you're looking for.
Absolutely. I mean, you need to have some kind of desired trend associated with these KPIs. That way you can understand if you are meeting your goals and going in the right direction that you're looking for. So for your homepage, maybe your goal is to decrease the percentages of exits. So when you're looking at all of this data, you want to look at, what are your percentage exit rates, and have they gone up lately? Have they gone down? Maybe there's a certain page that there's a high exit rate on. You can look into why that is and how you can change that to make it more aligned with the other ones. So as long as you know what your desired trend and objective is, you can find the data that you need to go along with that to make sure that you are actually achieving the goals that you set forth for yourself and meeting those objectives within your strategic plan and your marketing plan. Stacy, do you have some questions for us?
So one of the things that you talked about very early on, and it comes up quite a bit, is the reviews that can often be offset with accurate content on your website. But do you three want to talk a little bit about online reviews and the importance of not only making sure there's accurate information on your website, but a few highlights of best practices in handling those from a time standpoint and a response standpoint?
Yeah, so, when it comes to online reviews, it is pretty important to address, especially those negative ones, as quickly as possible. So you should be reviewing those every day just to make sure you can address any of them that may be alarming. You can set up different Google alerts and stuff like that to identify when certain words may pop up about your organization, and really looking at, developing a communication plan with a response tree of how do I respond to these negative reviews is really key. That way you don't have people running to upper management every time there's a negative review to make sure that they're responding in a way that your organization deems appropriate. So making sure that there's some kind of plan put together and what they should say in response to various different types of negative reviews that could be out there is really important for people.
And I think also to add to that, that doesn't mean when you have your response tree that you have to get into that issue right there. So a lot of times it's your tree will have responses where it's, I'm so sorry you had that experience. Let's talk about ways we can make this better. And I'm reaching out to you with an email to connect with you today. So there's a lot of more general responses that you're addressing that there's an issue. You understand that you're expressing, I'm sorry that you had this experience, and then you kind of take it offline so you're not really getting into the weeds there, but that way you can address it, and then hopefully that rectifies that for that individual in a different space. But timing is key, as Brittany said. I mean, being prompt to address those and not letting them sit there without a response. I mean, every comment, especially like Brittany said with negative ones, should always have a response, and it should be positive, because other users and other visitors aren't going to know the context of the situation, so they will take away how you respond and react to that individual.
And really another reason why it's so important to address those quickly are because every second that negative comment is there and you haven't responded, it looks poorly for you, and people are just seeing this negative comment with no response, and they're starting to think maybe this is true. So, that's why it's really key to make sure that you're addressing these comments quickly, but also making sure that you aren't getting into a argument in the comments of something online. You want to make sure that you address that you understand that there's a problem and that your organization does feel a certain way about said problem, and that you're moving it offline to actually discuss it further and address what the issue is and how it can be fixed.
Like, the three of you provided a ton of great information today, and we are coming to the end. Does anyone have any last words of wisdom to share with the group?
I don't think so.
I think for me, just to wrap it up, I mean, we talked about so much here today. It's so exciting. There's so many other avenues you can go. I think the takeaway is just really take some time to look at what you have out there. I mean, online is the door to your services and you as a company. So making sure that everything is in the best shape possible and making that journey easy for those users. And as Brittany mentioned, taking the friction out of that and any barriers. There's a lot of pieces and there's a lot of elements to it, stuff that we have to dive deeper into, like search engine optimization and really diving into the technical parts of the website. But really it's that overall message of you need to be visible in a way, and it has to be a positive light to be competitive so that someone's choosing you over the next organization that's listed there. So there's a lot we can take away from this, but definitely a topic that there's endless areas to expand upon in the future for sure.
Absolutely. I think that's really well said, Ashley. And that we have endless topics, and we'll put those into the 2022 weekly line. We are here every Thursday and at 1 o'clock, and our next presentation is going to be Thursday the 18th with Ken Carr, and he will be discussing matchmaker, do I need a match when mergers and acquisition is the right move? Ken Carr is a senior associate with Open Minds, and we're looking forward to hearing that one as well. As a reminder, today's presentation will be online, slides and presentations starting tomorrow, and we look forward to you having an opportunity to join us again To our speaking panel, thank you so much for your expertise and sharing. As a fellow marketer, I know that websites are never done. They are always a working process. And I think you did a great job of highlighting really those key strategies that need to be in place as we develop and continue to improve upon the online presence of our organizations. Thank you all and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For having